Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, is the U.S. government doing enough to protect the human rights of Native Americans in the United States? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is across the table from me, checking out all your live feedback as it comes in. So tweet her using the hashtag AJStream. Malika, we sent out a series of questions to our online community earlier about today's topic. What are you seeing come back in?
We did, and one of the questions we asked was what specific actions the U.S. could take to repair relations with Native Americans, and we got an answer. Curious tweets: give back their land, create jobs, and help revive their languages. Language is essential to reviving culture and instilling pride. So for those of you at home, if you agree with that, I'd like to add your voice to the conversation. Tweet us. Use the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us in studio is Sherry Salway Black. She is the director of the Partnership for Tribal Governance at the National Congress of American Indians. That is a Washington-based organization that works to protect the legal rights of Native Americans. Sherry, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting National Congress of American Indians. It's an honor to be here with James Anaya, the special rapporteur.
We are looking forward to a great discussion.
Great.
So, do you have a story that you want to share with us? Maybe it's something that's not getting the coverage that you think it deserves? Let us know. We rely on your involvement, so drop us a line via Twitter at AJStream. And here are some of the hashtags and the stories that we're following today. Native American communities today face the worst social and economic conditions of any other ethnic group in the United States. High rates of disease, violence, and lack of education continue to create barriers to improvement. And now, for the first time, a UN human rights inquiry has concluded that the U.S. government must do more to address the current challenges faced by Native Americans. Many say the root of the issue lies in tribal land rights and historic wrongs committed against them. Take a look at this video from the Indian Land Tenure Foundation.
We are honored to serve our communities and our country. We are the stewards of our land and our natural resources. And yet, for 125 years, commitments to the Native Americans have not been honored. Due to legislation enacted February 8th, 1887, control of Native American lands is mired in bureaucracy, lost to government seizure, and taken from the Native people of this land. After all this time, Native Americans are still not honored with the same rights and freedom as other people. Is it honorable that the racism that shaped this policy 125 years ago should still be in place? We think not.
The Dawes Act was repealed in 1934, but the legacy of it and other discriminatory policies are still felt to this day. So what does it mean for the cultural survival and the human rights of indigenous peoples in the U.S.? And what more can the U.S. government do to mend a deep history of injustice toward Native Americans? Joining us to discuss these issues is James Anaya. He is the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Earlier this year, he visited Native American communities on a fact-finding mission that resulted in the UN's report. He is joining us via Skype from the state of Arizona. James, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. It's good to be on the program.
So, James, you're of indigenous ancestry. You've worked to promote the rights of indigenous groups for many years, but this report that you just completed is the first such UN inquiry/fact-finding mission in history. Why now?
Well, it was a result of a discussion between myself as UN Special Rapporteur, Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the representative of the government at the United Nations, following the Obama administration's endorsement on behalf of the United States of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It seemed the appropriate time to have a fresh look, at least from the international perspective, on how the U.S. is faring in its treatment of the indigenous peoples of the country and how indigenous peoples themselves are progressing or what barriers they face. And so it was essentially a cooperative endeavor to do this inquiry. When I say cooperative, I mean I did count on and have the cooperation of the United States in doing it, but of course the cooperation of indigenous peoples themselves and in doing this inquiry.
So you traveled around the U.S. to various reservations. What did you find, and what are you calling for?
Well, essentially, I found continuing vibrant communities. Indigenous peoples throughout the country continue to exist, and I think that is something that American people need to be aware of. Because I also found that there's widespread misunderstanding or lack of understanding among the public at large about the continued existence, vibrancy, and contributions of the Native Americans to the country and its social fabric. But I also found that indigenous peoples, in their quest to survive and as distinct communities with their cultures intact and to progress economically, face significant challenges that are rooted in history, the history that you've already alluded to in this program, and that the video that we just saw references. And this history manifests itself in the social ills that are unique among Native Americans in the sense that Native Americans, as you mentioned, suffer from social ills that are at rates much higher than other groups, other demographic groups or ethnic groups in the country. And there's a direct correlation, and that's been established by numerous studies, between this history of oppression, which involves the taking of lands, the misdealings of all sorts, misdealings that have been acknowledged by the government itself, both historically and today. There's a direct correlation between these misdealings, this history, and the conditions of Native Americans today. And so what I'm recommending is that there need to be concerted efforts engaged in by the United States in cooperation and in consultation with indigenous peoples to address these problems, and not just the manifestations of the problems, the symptoms of the problems, which are in these social and economic ills, but the root causes of them. The root causes in the loss of land, in the loss of economic base, in the loss of culture, and so forth. And this conversation, there needs to be a conversation between the government and indigenous peoples to address these issues, and a real resolve on the part of the government to move forward to address these issues.
Sherry, James is talking about these historic wrongs. Has the U.S. government done enough to correct these historic wrongs?
Well, I think we've made a very good movement forward over the last 30 to 40 years. If you go back and look at where we were 50, 60 years ago when NCAI started, really looking at defeating the policies of the federal government to terminate tribes, then I feel like we really moved forward from that point to look at more self-determination, self-governance, and to look at building the capacity of tribes to really begin to address things for themselves and to push back against those government policies. And I think we have a ways to go. There are still some policies that are paternalistic, but I think tribes are building capacity and moving forward, and I think the administration, particularly this administration, has really moved forward some great policies as well, and working with tribes on a government-to-government basis. But yes, there are these remnants of colonial paternalism, and we're continuing to move forward on those.
Well, while you mentioned moving forward, you also said that there is a ways to go, and Tony Thorne on Twitter agrees. He says the U.S. cannot protect the rights and interests of a people they forcefully and underhandedly cheated of their homeland. But James, I'd like to direct the next one to you. We asked our community, just as Lisa just asked, if the U.S. has done enough to reconcile injustices committed against Native Americans, and he says, have we done anything to even start the process? How do you make up wiping out an entire continent of people? But would you agree that your report is a start of that process?
Well, first of all, let me say that I do agree with Ms. Black that that a good bit has been done. There has been a sea change of sorts, you could say, in government policy and government attitudes towards indigenous peoples, and that is a change towards promoting self-determination, self-governance on the part of indigenous peoples. That that has to contend, though, with the history and the remnants of that, and that's the problem, that you still see the remnants of those past policies manifesting themselves in various ways, including the paternalism that Ms. Black referred to. But there is a good bit to be done, and that is the enormous challenge. It's really difficult to reverse, and we're really decades or centuries of policies of action that have constituted injustices against Native Americans. And so what's needed is still a good bit of effort on the part of the federal government in cooperation with the indigenous peoples to address the remnants of those historical injustices. Let me say that I do see, and I do report in the document that I produced, the report that I issued at the conclusion of my visit or following my visit. I do report of policies in recent years to strengthen the capacity of indigenous peoples to take control of their own lives, and I think those are positive developments in that.
Sherry, sometimes this conversation becomes oversimplified and people think that it's really not just about land, but with the loss of land comes the loss of control of things that have religious and cultural significance. Talk a little bit about what those losses, the implication of those losses, what that really means to a society.
Very complex issue. I think if you go back 100 years and more to when the treaties were in place and people were put on reservations, what it meant then was the loss of your traditional lifestyle. I mean, your traditional sources of food were gone, your sacred places where you performed ceremonies, where you collected food and other sacred goods was removed. It really was a total disruption to the culture in the sense of the gender roles of people, the roles of extended families, all were changed because of that. And so much of the culture resides in the land of groups in this country. Native people are really tied to the land in ways that are cultural or spiritual or economic, social, political. So any disruption to that land, I think, has been so detrimental.
It's really
to
destabilizing at the core.
Definitely.
That's right, and I would add that, if I could, that destabilization continues. When I was doing my tour through the United States, I heard that repeatedly from leaders and grassroots members of communities throughout the country and in Alaska and Hawaii about the severing or the impediments of that the maintenance of those connections with sacred places throughout the country. And I think that there are solutions to this issue, this ongoing issue of loss of access to sacred places. And I've tried to point to some of the solutions in my report, and we do see some movement on the part of the government and the Forest Service and in the National Park Service in particular to addressing this issue of access to sacred places. But I must say there's a great deal to be done there, and part of it's a political problem, simply the inertia or worse, the resistance within the government among political forces to opening up these sacred places or allowing for these reconnections to take place. And we're not talking about necessarily wholesale return of lands to indigenous peoples, although yes, there is a call for that in certain contexts, but allowing for innovative arrangements or promoting innovative arrangements by which indigenous peoples can regain those connections, I think is entirely possible in a practical sense without detriment to the larger American community or the public or to any particular private interests.
I think it's important that message resonate with members of our community who are a bit more skeptical. Whitney Berry, who says that she is a member of a Native American tribe, says we are still treated as children, unable to negotiate our own gas and oil leases on our lands or in truth do much of anything with them, meaning the U.S. government, aside from casino buildings. And that's a comment she left on our Google Plus page. But Sherry, have a listen to this video comment from the opposite end.
Native Americans have many rights in the United States, especially living in Florida. I have witnessed many of them receiving thousands of dollars a month for having children. Likewise, they also have the right to have casinos and often are tax-free in their lands. They often get many government funds, and they have the right to apply their own laws and customs to their land. Basically, it's not American territory. They have the same rights as American citizens.
That got cut off, but he says they have the same rights as American citizens. Your thoughts?
Again, it's a very complex discussion in this. Yes, many tribes do have casinos. Not all are wildly successful as people think. And there are, I think what he was referring to, I shouldn't probably guess about this, with paying to have children, is that there are, payments for minors that they don't get until they're 18 years old. And it really is a focus on, for 100 years, there's been this lack of development, poverty, and some tribes have taken the route of casino development as a way out of poverty. And they've put tremendous amounts of funds into infrastructure, schools, roads, that they never had the ability to do previously because the government didn't live up to their responsibility made in treaties to provide those kinds of things. So the tribes now are taking that on themselves to do it. And I think that, again, what he's given is just sort of this really light glimpse of things, and there's such complexity in each one of the items that if we had a couple of hours, we could take each one apart. But
speaking of complexities, James, one of the members of our community that Malika was just reading a tweet from was talking about how members of the indigenous community feel like they're being treated as children, particularly with their land. Right now the government holds about 55 million acres of Native American lands in trusts. Can you explain to us what that means and how that figures into the whole picture?
Are
James?
you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. First of all, if I could go back to the last comment, yes, I agree that it's a complex issue, but in one fundamental way, it's not. It's simply wrong to assert or to assume that Native Americans, by and large, are living in largesse because they have casinos or because they're misusing the welfare state. That's just not true. Everybody can point to anecdotes of abuse or anecdotes of someone from this group or that group having access to economic development, but that doesn't change the basic fact that overall Native Americans, indigenous peoples, are economically disadvantaged. And it's just not true that the tribes just are living off economic bounty by and large because of casinos. According to data that's been collected, that the government itself has access to, that I've seen, it's about a third of Indian tribes in the country have casinos, and of those, only a handful really reap substantial economic benefits, such that they're able to distribute those benefits to individual members and allow their members to live in some largesse. So it's just a misconception, and that's a problem, and that's part of the problem I alluded to before, that in the public at large, there is just this misunderstanding or lack of understanding about the reality of Native Americans. And worse, there are these prejudices that we see because someone has some anecdote that they can tell about this person they knew or that person they knew or this particular situation. And that's related to the next question, which is this question of this issue of historical paternalism that manifests itself in various arrangements, various doctrines. Now, the holding in trust of lands on the part of the federal government is a historical phenomenon. It results from the earlier practices by the colonial powers and then by the United States to assert an interest in the underlying title to indigenous lands. It's really a colonial doctrine, a colonial practice that continues to manifest itself today. But the policy of the government has been not to allow that holding in trust, that of arrangement, to impede indigenous people's own capacity to economically develop. And that's their right, to pursue their own economic development on these lands, and without the government impeding that. And so this trusteeship relationship the government is really one of protection in the positive sense, of a protectorate status to assist indigenous peoples in the positive sense, not in a paternalistic sense, to move forward with their economic development and development in a broader sense. And so while this trusteeship arrangement is a remnant of the colonial past and paternalism, we hope that we've turned a corner, one in which it's a way by which the government can help assist indigenous peoples themselves develop. And so what needs to happen, and the direction things need to go further in, is that indigenous peoples in the United States are allowed and assisted in gaining the capacity to strengthen their ability to, on their own, develop economically, socially, and culture to regain that self-governance capacity, and that's happening. Happily that's happening. And the most healthy indigenous communities, the ones that are moving forward economically, are regaining culture and are defeating social ills that have plagued them, are those that are genuinely in exercise of self-governance, that are able to take control of their lives. And it's a bit, if you look at it from the classic, the standpoint of classic American values, this is American Values 101. It's about people taking control of their own lives. It's about people exercising local control, local self-governance, and so. It's very much consistent with the broader sense of what America is about. People taking control.
Sherry,
of their own lives.
I want to get you in here and give us a sense of what real reconciliation looks like from your perspective.
Again, you're asking me. I'm sorry.
No, this is for Sherry Black.
Okay, sorry.
I think, could I just kind of quickly talk about something that Mr. Anaya was saying?
We've got about 2 minutes left in the program.
Ooh, okay. Reconciliation. So let me go to that. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly what that will look at. What we've had, I'm not sure we've had that yet. When you talk about what is reconciliation, we've had different kinds of strategies by the federal government in terms of settlements, but reconciliation to me has a connotation of healing. And I'm not sure we've gotten to that point yet. Point in question yesterday was Columbus Day. I know there were issues, and demonstrations around the country. A few years ago, there was an apology by the Congress, but no one knows about it. So I'm not sure that we've made that movement towards reconciliation of really, as Mr. Anaya was saying, have this education of people understanding what actually did happen and why the circumstances are the way they are today. And this history of us being much more civically educated in terms of, and historically educated. So I think we're not there yet, but we're making maybe some incremental movement towards that, but we really need to address that.
Our thanks to Sherry Salway Black, Special Rapporteur James Anaya. You can follow more about this story on our website at stream.aljazeera.com. Before we go, we want to get to Malika, who's got a couple other stories that we're following.
Thousands of Egyptians have marked the anniversary of what's been called the Maspero massacre, taking to the streets and the web to remember those killed. With more than 3,000 mentions, the hashtag Maspero emerged among netizens, recalling the day soldiers turned their weapons on demonstrators in this Cairo neighborhood. Citizen journalists flooded social networks with pictures of protesters calling for justice. Beautiful that Muslims and Copts are marching and mourning together and music being stopped to respect the call to prayer. This is the Egypt I know, tweets May. Our next leads from China, where video of a student fed up with a lack of free speech has gone viral. As reported by Global Voices, the student interrupted a talk by a pro-government commentator by throwing a shoe. Watch. The student yells, "Even if your talk isn't good, you can go back to your hotel. If I argue against it, I will be locked up in a tiny, dark room." When Chinese netizens were split on the act. Some clapped their hands, some criticized the student. I don't agree that throwing shoes is an attack. It's just a form of protest by the weak side in a situation when the power is not equal, one person writes. And our last lead looks at a new smartphone app that brings paintings to life. Developed by 3 Japanese artists, the tool takes well-known drawings and converts them into animations. Take a look. Users can download the app online for free and try their own virtual reality. We're always looking for news stories, so let us know what's happening where you are. Send us a leads idea using hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, on tomorrow's show, is it time to move beyond the battle of the sexes, or has the war just begun? We're going to talk to the author of the book, The End of Men. And until then, we'll see you online.